Hello, I'm Mark Austin, and this is the Sky News Daily. Today, was there a Whitehall cover-up of the grooming gangs scandal? Today, the report into grooming gangs in England and Wales has been released, with Home Secretary Yvette Cooper reporting on the findings in the Commons.
At its heart, she identifies a deep-rooted failure to treat children as children. A continued failure to protect children and teenage girls from rape, from exploitation and serious violence, and from the scars that last a lifetime.
She said too little has changed over the last decade, but now was the time for action.
The reforms I've set out today will mean the strongest action any government has taken to tackle child sexual exploitation, more police investigations, more arrests, a new inquiry, changes to the law to protect children, and a fundamental overhaul of the way organisations work.
It's been over a decade since the scandal emerged in towns such as Rotherham and Rochdale, a scandal which involved groups of men, mainly of Pakistani descent, who were convicted of sexually abusing and raping predominantly young white girls. Victims and activists have been calling for a public inquiry for years. Now, Keir Starmer's government has U-turned, and the Home Secretary has said there will be a full national inquiry and new laws to protect children. But why has it taken so long? And was there a Whitehall cover-up? Liz Bates, Sky's political correspondent, has been digging into this. So, Liz, just take us back to the beginning. What is the grooming gang scandal all about?
Well, there have been lots of grooming gang scandals all over the country. This very specific issue started to come out into the public domain in the early 2000s. One of the first big moments, really, was Rotherham. Now, it came out incrementally at first. The Times did an expose on what was going on in Rotherham. So that was around 2011. Some very young, but also some teenagers, white girls being raped, sexually exploited, trafficked, predominantly by local men from the Pakistani community. So that came out in the Times. After that, there was an inquiry, first of all, by Professor Alexis Jay, who you will know did the more recent, much broader 2022 inquiry into child sexual abuse. After that came Louise Casey. Now, this was one of the first big explosive moments in grooming gangs. Louise Casey was sent by the then Conservative government into Rotherham to see what the institutional failures had been behind this grooming gang scandal. And what she found was deeply shocking. It was failures from the police who saw these young girls, and they described them in these words themselves as little prostitutes. So they didn't act when they saw what was going on, when they saw that these girls were being exploited. In many cases, they actually arrested the girls for being drunk and disorderly when they found them at house parties with much, much older men. And then on top of that, many institutional failures within child protection that went all the way up to the top of the council. She found that the council leader and others had turned a blind eye. So all of those people in authority that could have intervened to stop this happening had turned a blind eye. And that's what was so shocking about the report. What happened after that was that council, most of them resigned, it went into special measures, and that really set a pattern after that for the exposure of lots more councils, Rochdale, Oxford, but up and down the country, that were also found to have been complicit in letting these grooming gang scandals fester. That's where it started. 10 years later, she's had to look at this again, Louise Casey, in a different role under a Labour government because simply not enough has been done.
Right, so what are her main findings this time round?
Well, what Louise Casey was tasked with this time was, in quite a short period, she is a sort of government troubleshooter. She was asked to look at what we knew now about grooming gangs and to bring together some of the understanding of it, to ask the question, how is it being dealt with in lots of different areas across the country? Is there a good understanding of the racial dynamics? Is there a good understanding of what is really going on in all these different communities? And is there still some institutional resistance among the police, among councils, to actually face up to it and to deal with it? And what she concluded was that, yes, there are still those issues and that there now should be a national inquiry.
Right, and all very difficult politically for Keir Starmer because, of course, he said originally that he didn't think a national inquiry was necessary.
Yes, Mark, and this is politically difficult for the Labour Party because what they've done, and I think there's a level of naivety in this. They came into government, obviously there's a lot on their plate in lots of different areas, but they have allowed the pressure to build up over having a national inquiry into grooming gangs. One of the reasons for this is because there have been lots of local inquiries in lots of different areas across the country. And I think Keir Starmer felt that the time now was not for looking back and inquiring and probing. The time now was for taking action and making sure that the police are making these arrests. But in the end, the political pressure really became too much, and that is how we've got to this position. Also worth saying, the political fallout today will fall on the Labour Party, but the decade before that, I think it's worth remembering when Conservative politicians are very critical of the Labour Party, they had a decade to launch a national inquiry themselves and they never did it. So they are, to some extent, abdicating their responsibility on this.
Right, and now I understand you've been talking to Dominic Cummings, who has certainly lent credence to this whole idea of a cover-up.
He certainly has, Mark, and Dominic Cummings does not hold back on anything. Now, I did a wide-ranging interview with him recently, and he mentioned this issue. Now, he's been pushing more recently for a national inquiry. I asked him what his interest was in this issue. Now, what he says is, and he's had many different roles in government before he worked for Boris Johnson, and one of those was at the Department for Education, working for Michael Gove. Now, what he said is that he saw Whitehall civil servants attempting, in his words, to cover up that original Rotherham grooming scandal. What he says is the Times newspaper and Andrew Norfolk, who has sadly died quite recently, he was the pioneering journalist in this area. Andrew Norfolk went to Rotherham Council with his story. Rotherham Council then approached the Department for Education and said, we want to use the legal process to try to stop the Times publishing this story.
So in 2011, he was digging around on one of the very first stories that he did. And officials came to me in the Department for Education and said, there's this Times journalist who wants to write this story about these gangs. The local authority wants to judicially review it and stop the Times publishing the story. So I went to Michael Gove and said, this council is trying to actually stop...
What, was it Rotherham?
Yeah. It's trying to stop this, and they're going to use judicial review. You should tell the council that far from siding with the council to stop the Times, you will write to the judge and hand over a whole bunch of documents and actually blow up the council's JR. Gove, to his credit, and various other officials strongly agreed with me. So it was a classic thing in Whitehall, right? Some officials wanted a total cover-up and were on the side of the council. But other officials, including in the DfE private office, said this is completely outrageous and we should blow it up. Gove did. The judicial review got blown up. Norfolk stories ran. So I know from my own experience, because obviously the child protection stuff all got put in that department because of complicated reasons to do with Gordon Brown and Ed Bulls. So I had to deal with all of that back then and saw for myself that there were constant cover-ups on the child abuse stuff.
You could have said, I want a national inquiry. The PM's going to order a national inquiry. Let's start it. You can pull the trigger on it, right? An inquiry is not that difficult to get going. Doesn't mean it's going to be good, whatever, but you can...
There are a million things that that I wanted to do, but in 2019 we were dealing with a constitutional crisis. I've pushed on all of this stuff from when I got involved with it in 2011 and was looking at all these serious case review stuff, business. But it's a bit like Russia and money, right? It's one of those subjects that no one in Whitehall really wanted to touch.
Now, there are lots of issues within that. I think we at Sky News have done our journalistic due diligence on this and spoken to people familiar with the scenario at the time. I think the word cover-up provokes strong emotions. The officials at the Department for Education are likely to have been thinking at the time that they wanted to protect the children within the story, so they didn't want to in any way expose them or reveal their identities. And the other issue I think that they were grappling with was some of this was already known in Rotherham, in the council, in child protection. They told the department they were already doing the work to try to change things, to try to change culture, to do better for victims. And the feeling within the department was that at times expose could really set them back. So it's not to say that they were acting in bad faith, but they certainly didn't want the information about this to come out. Dominic Cummings says that he, alongside other officials and Michael Gove, made sure that it did come out so people knew the truth on these grooming gangs. The thing that's really interesting, I think, about what Dominic Cummings has said is a lot of the time with grooming gangs, we rightly, because these are the people that are absolutely responsible on the front line. We focus on police forces, child protection services and councils. What Dominic Cummings is suggesting is that there was incompetence and cover-up that didn't just finish locally. It went right to the top, right to the heart of government, and that we had civil servants, senior officials in this country, this is what he is alleging, that saw details of a grooming gangs scandal that were about to come out in the newspapers and wanted to stop that becoming public. That is a very serious allegation, and it raises very broad questions about government in this country and the type of information that they want to keep hidden from the public.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is that it raises the whole point about who's been pushing this behind the scenes, if you like. We know the tweets from Elon Musk that contributed to this, bizarrely. And I suppose the questions will be whether, for instance, Dominic Cummings was in some sort of contact with Elon Musk.
I mean, Mark, you couldn't make it up, could you? It really is so bizarre and convoluted. So one of the real big moments, the big moment under this government of political pressure was when Elon Musk, I mean, how he knew about this, who knows, got involved in the grooming gang scandal. Very specifically, it was about a request in Oldham for another inquiry. Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister, had said no, it wasn't necessary. Elon Musk criticised her on his social media platform, on X, and that opened the floodgates for a barrage of criticism from the US and, of course, domestically here in the UK from Conservative politicians who wanted to build on that. Now, the question at the time was, who is pulling the strings, if you like, behind Elon Musk? Because why would he know about this? Why would he be interested? And the answer came from lots of different places. Is it Dominic Cummings? The language he used, the issue at hand, the effect that it had on UK politics seemed to have someone like Dominic Cummings behind it. I asked Dominic Cummings, he said, absolutely not. It wasn't me. I have never spoken to Elon Musk. But I think there are still lots of raised eyebrows about that in Westminster.
On the question of the inquiry, are there concerns that it will just, go on too long and take too much time and people will forget about it?
Yeah, and I think you really identified what's at the heart of this issue, why there's been a debate about it. So it's not really that any politicians just simply don't care about the victims of child sexual abuse. The argument has been about what is effective in helping them now. Now, calling a national inquiry often feels important, and it means that you're able to call witnesses, and it keeps the issue right at the front of the public consciousness. On the other hand, a national inquiry has no power to do anything apart from make recommendations to government, and that we've seen lots of inquiries and they make recommendations and there's a lot of press coverage around it, and in the end the victims tell us quite often years later that they still feel that not enough has been done for them. So that's the flaw really in this process. In the end, we got to this point, I think, of pretty intense political pressure, and that's why this decision has been made. And of course the government will always lean on Louise Casey, who is a complete expert in this field.
And look, you've been following this for some time. Just give us a sense of the key areas that you think this national inquiry will be looking at?
I think, look, the key areas will be, and have been for a long time, first of all, patchy effectiveness in the way certainly police forces deal with this issue across the country. So one of the central issues, and this has been identified many times before, is there needs to be best practice. There are some police forces, because they've been doing it now for so long, that are very good at dealing with this, and others that are absolutely terrible and are still afraid to face it head on. And that needs to be addressed. The other issue is institutional failures. And to be honest, this is why I was so fascinated by what Dominic Cummings said, because at the heart of this is the police failed, and then all of those other institutions that could have put pressure on the police, that could have intervened, people in power, people who have that type of authority to notice that something is going completely wrong, turned away. Now, what Dominic Cummings is saying is that wasn't just local councils, it went right to the top of government. It is still important that we find out if there were people, and there still are people in power, who are not willing to address this grooming scandal. And I think that is something that we'll see play out.
So the inquiry will happen. What do you think the victims will be thinking? Will they be thinking, finally, we may get some redress, finally, we may get some accountability? Or do you think it will be more, finally, everyone may know exactly what happened?
I think one of the things that the victims will all be feeling today is tired of having to fight for so long to get the recognition that they deserve, and some kind of action on what has happened to them. I think many of them will be feeling, why did some of these reports come out a decade ago and now we're having yet another inquiry? There are many victims that have long wanted to see a national inquiry because they wanted to see this issue given the status that they feel that it deserves. They want to see witnesses, people in authority that turned a blind eye to this. They want to see those types of people questioned, forced to answer questions. And they want to do the work that is necessary and see the work done to protect people from this horrendous crime in the future. So I think they will be feeling some sense of relief that this inquiry has been launched, but they've been through this before. So they will want to see action on the ground that really makes a difference for victims and prevents future victims falling into the hands of these grooming gangs. And I think they'll be waiting to see what actually happens.
Thank you very much, Liz. That's it for today. You can read more about the grooming gang scandal on the Sky News website. We'll be back again tomorrow.